Good morning. Welcome to the United Church of Strafford, getting acquainted with Teilhard de Chardin. We're excited that you're all here. I have a couple of announcements, and then I want to see if anybody else has any announcements. One of them is that today is a Deacons Fund Sunday, so anything that you put in one of those little offering baskets will go to the Deacons Fund, where it will be very well used, so just so you know that. And the another announcement is that we do have no coffee, but we do have ice cream. We have the most important thing. So after church, please feel free to join us in the back for your ice cream, and good neighborliness. Are there any other announcement anybody needs to share? Becky?
I'll just say a word for the rest of the Seeking Spirit series. It's really going to be, we're excited about it. Herbert Gertz is next week. And then the following week, where is Rachel Giraldi?
Herbert's next week, and Rachel's the week after that.
Rachel Giraldi will be coming, and then the final weekend in August, the V-Tones are going to lead just a sing. It's going to be an a cappella, sing your heart out kind of Sunday. So we're really looking for what are some hymns you really want to sing in four-part robust harmony. Tell me today. I'm going to bring them to the group on Monday, and we'll have them workshop so we can really lead that. So tell us what you want. You can email me too if you don't think about it.
And to quote Ann Winters, a former choir director here at this church, she would always say to the choir in a very encouraging way, remember, in singing, enthusiasm is more important than accuracy. So that's kind of a good thing to keep in mind. Any other announcements? That's not true of other things, by the way, but it's true of singing. Okay.
Hang on, just hang on, wait a minute, I got something to say. I'm not asking you to move on or forget it, but these are better days. To be wrong all along and admit it, it's not amazing grace, but to be loved like a song you remember.
you, Eric. And now it's time for the blessing and the lighting of the peace candle. The words are right in your one-page bulletin. Join me in this response to the blessing and the lighting of the peace candle. In Christ was life, and the life was the light of the world. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome. Let us pray for peace and the things that make for peace as we light the peace candle. And now let's join together in reading in unison the 23rd Psalm. This is the King James Version. I'm sure many of you will recognize, and there's other versions, but this is a great one. It's old, but it's great. It's old and it's great. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So Mel, in a few minutes, is going to share with us some haiku that she has written about Teilhard de Chardin. And before she does that, I'm going to just do a little information about Teilhard, and kind of breaking what I know is a really important rule in that you should really never talk about something that you don't know a lot about. And I don't really know a lot about Teilhard de Chardin, but I learned a lot over this last couple of weeks. So I'm going to share with you what I learned. And then Mel and Suzanne are going to share with you from some other perspectives about this really quite amazing person. I'm just wondering, just put your thumb up if you've ever heard of Teilhard de Chardin. Oh, a lot of people have, and some people haven't. I bet you haven't read. Has anybody read this book?
Some of it.
You've read it?
Some of it.
Some of it. It's hard. It's very hard. So today, we are going to meet a scientist, priest, philosopher, spiritual explorer named Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. If you know about Teilhard, you will appreciate getting to hear about him again. If you've never heard of him, this might be a good place to start. As a kid growing up in Connecticut, long before cell phones became an appendage of one's body, we, like everyone else, had a family phone. It was on my mother's desk in her bedroom. So I would chat away to my friends, and as I did so, I kept eyeing the books she had there. I got very used to those covers. Moby Dick by Herman Melville, Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, which that time cost 50 cents to buy, and The Phenomenon of Man by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. Of course, it wasn't too long before I read the first two, but The Phenomenon of Man required a lot of effort. I tried it a couple of times, but found the going so hard that I really never got very far. Then, many decades later, I came across the book Non-Zero by Robert Wright. That's this book right here. Wright is an evolutionary biologist, kind of like Teilhard was, although he was a paleontologist. The thesis of his book is that evolution is a fundamental concept in every way, both biological and spiritual. I'm going to just read that sentence again. The thesis of his book is that evolution is a fundamental concept in every way, both biological and moral, spiritual. As life has evolved from very rudimentary through greater and greater complexity, so too has human culture, including moral spiritual culture, some huge setbacks notwithstanding. He closes the book with some hesitant speculations that perhaps there is a higher purpose of some sort in, and this is a quote from him, the phase of history that seems to lie immediately ahead, a social, political, and even moral culmination of sorts, end of quote. I devoured this book. I bought, I think, 6 copies and gave them away. But I shouldn't have been surprised. If I had actually read Teilhard's Phenomenon of Man, I would have recognized Wright's ideas as being deeply influenced by Teilhard many years earlier. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin was born in France in 1881, and he died on Easter Sunday in April of 1955. He was a devout Jesuit priest and highly educated paleontologist. As a deeply religious thinker and also a keen scientific observer, Teilhard spent much of his mental, emotional, and spiritual energy trying to reconcile what he knew of science, particularly the enormous implications of evolution, and what he believed about God and religion, particularly Jesuit Catholicism. Over that time, Teilhard came to believe that the ever-evolving complexity of life would meet with expanding spiritual understanding in a universal system that is bound by love. I'm going to read that sentence again. Over that time, Teilhard came to believe that the ever-evolving complexity of life would meet with expanding spiritual understanding in a universal system that is bound by love. He came to call this final stage the noosphere. According to Teilhard, the noosphere emerges through and is created by human minds, and they're engaging with one another. He believed that as humankind organizes itself in more complex social networks, which he called a form of evolution, the noosphere too will grow. Teilhard argued that the noosphere is growing towards an ever greater integration and union, or oneness, culminating in what he called the omega point, which one could call the union with God in love, which he saw as the goal of history. So that's kind of hard stuff. Expressing these beliefs was no small task in the first half of the 20th century. The Society of Jesuits of the Catholic Church had a clear and pretty non-negotiable set of beliefs, and they did not include Teilhard's views. He was reprimanded, moved around, and finally forbidden to publish. At one point, the church required him to recant his views formally, and shades of Galileo 500 years earlier, Teilhard obeyed. He died in New York City in 1955 with The Phenomenon of Man unpublished, so even though he obeyed, he kept writing. A few months later, the book found its way to publication anyway, outside of the aegis of the Catholic Church. And a few years later, by around 1959, a copy found its way to my mother's desk. Today, we are going to hear some works of haiku inspired by Teilhard de Chardin from Mel Gertz. Suzanne Lupien, herself a local writer and thinker, will share with us an essay by Jean Houston about her own personal encounter with Teilhard. And we welcome you all.
I'm so glad that Joey could bring you a presentation of his writings. I found them difficult, and so I decided to put them into haiku so I could understand my haiku. That was what I'm going to do, is read these haiku that I jotted down. I can't keep calling him Chardin. That's really, I think, the place that he comes from. But Teilhard is his name. Teilhard teaches us to see, to unite with the love all around us. The art of seeing into nature opens us up to the universe. As your vision expands, consciousness increases, a closer union with what you're seeing. To see more is the key to the mysterious gift of existence. Love created the first cell, then love joined two of the cells together. That was love. There's a great presence in the universe, a mysterious center, and Joey spoke of that. There's radiation from that center we feel in our center. He calls it omega. So you go from alpha with those two cells joining to omega. That's a sort of a summary of what I got out of it. And Suzanne has a wonderful, wonderful piece to read to you now. You really meet Teilhard in it.
And now Suzanne is going to share with us an essay by Jean Houston. If anybody is interested in looking at a PBS documentary about Teilhard, you can get it on YouTube. And Jean Houston actually has a little piece in that.
My sister watched it yesterday.
Oh, did she?
She said it was really very interesting.
It was very good, yeah. But this essay is really something to listen to. Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you, Joey. Thank you, everybody. This was sent to me in the mail sometime in the winter time by a friend, and I was so astounded by it and loved it so much that I spent the subsequent 2 weeks phoning everybody I knew who I thought might be interested and reading it to them. Mr. Teilhard by Jean Houston. When I was about 14, I was seized by enormous waves of grief over my parents' breakup. I had read somewhere that running would help dispel anguish, so I began to run to school every day down Park Avenue in New York City. I was a great big overgrown girl, 5'11" by the age of 11, And one day I ran into a rather frail old gentleman in his 70s and knocked the wind out of him. He laughed as I helped him to his feet and asked me in French accented speech, "Are you planning to run like that for the rest of your life?" "Yes, sir," I replied. "It looks that way." "Bon voyage," he said. "Bon voyage," I answered and sped on my way. About a week later, I was walking down Park Avenue with my fox terrier, Champ. And again, I met the old gentleman. "Ah," he greeted me, "my friend the runner, and with a fox terrier. I knew one like that years ago in France. Where are you going?" "Well, sir," I replied, "I'm taking Champ to Central Park." "I will go with you," he informed me. "I will take my constitutional." And thereafter, for about a year or so, the old gentleman and I would meet and walk together, often several times a week, in Central Park. He had a long French name, but asked me to call him by the first part of it, which was Mr. Taylor, as far as I could make out. The walks were magical and full of delight. Not only did Mr. Taylor seem to have absolutely no self-consciousness, but he was always being seized by wonder and astonishment over the simplest things. He was constantly and literally falling into love. I remember one time when he suddenly fell on his knees, his long Gallic nose raking the ground, and exclaimed to me, "Jeanne, look at the caterpillar! Ah!" I joined him on the ground to see what had evoked so profound a response, that he was seized by the essence of caterpillar. "How beautiful it is," he remarked, "this little green being with its wonderful, funny little feet. Exquisite. Little furry body, little green feet on the road to metamorphosis." He then regarded me with equal delight. "Jeanne, can you feel yourself to be a caterpillar?" "Oh, yes," I replied, with the baleful knowing of a gangly, pimply-faced teenager. "Then think of your own metamorphosis," he suggested. "What will you be when you become a butterfly? Un papillon, hein? What is the butterfly of Jeanne?" What a great question for a 14-year-old girl. His long, Gothic, comic, tragic face would nod with wonder. "Ah, Jeanne, look at the clouds. God's calligraphy in the sky. All the transforming, moving, changing, dissolving, becoming. Jeanne, become a cloud and become all the forms that ever were." Or there was the time that Mr. Taylor and I leaned into the strong wind that suddenly whipped through Central Park, and he told me, "Jeanne, sniff the wind." I joined him in taking great snorts of wind. The same wind may once have been sniffed by Jesus Christ, by Alexander the Great, by Napoleon, by Voltaire, by Marie Antoinette. There seemed to be a lot of French people in that wind. Now sniff this next gust of wind in very deeply, for it contains Jeanne d'Arc. Sniff the wind once sniffed by Jeanne d'Arc. Be filled with the winds of history. It was wonderful. People of all ages followed us around, laughing, not at us, but with us. Old Mr. Taylor was truly diaphanous to every moment, and being with him was like being in attendance at God's own party, a continuous celebration of life and its mysteries. But mostly Mr. Taylor was so full of vital sap and juice that he seemed to flow with everything. Always he saw the interconnections between things, the way that everything in the universe, from fox terriers to tree bark to somebody's red hat to the mind of God, was related to everything else and was very, very good. He wasn't merely a great appreciator, engaged by his senses. He was truly penetrated by the reality that was yearning for him, as much as he was yearning for it. He talked to the trees, to the wind, to the rocks, as dear friends, as beloved even. "Ah, my friend, the mica schist layer. Do you remember when?" And I would swear that the mica schist would begin to glitter back. I mean, mica schist will do that, but on a cloudy day? Everything was treated as personal, as sentient, as thou. And everything that was thou was ensouled with being, and it thou'd back to him. So when I walked with him, I felt as though a spotlight was following us, bringing radiance and light everywhere. And I was constantly seized by astonishment in the presence of this infinitely beautiful man who radiated such sweetness, such kindness. I remember one occasion when he was quietly watching a very old woman watching a young boy play a game. "Madame," he suddenly addressed her. She looked up, surprised that a stranger in Central Park would speak to her. "Madame," he repeated, "why are you so fascinated by what that little boy is doing?" The old woman was startled by the question, but the kindly face of Mr. Taylor seemed to allay her fears and evoke her memories. "Well, sir," she replied in an ancient but pensive voice, "the game that boy is playing is like one I played in this park around 1880. Only it's a mite different." We noticed that the boy was listening, so Mr. Taylor promptly included him in the conversation. "Young fellow, would you like to learn the game as it was played so many years ago?" "Well, yeah, sure, why not?" the boy replied. And soon the young boy and the old woman were making friends and sharing old and new variations on the game, as unlikely an incident to occur in Central Park as could be imagined. But perhaps the most extraordinary thing about Mr. Taylor was the way he would suddenly look at you. He looked at you with wonder and astonishment, joined to unconditional love, joined to a whimsical regarding of you as the cluttered house that hides the Holy One. I felt myself primed to the depths by such seeing. I felt evolutionary forces wake up in me by such seeing. Every cell and thought and potential palpably changed. I was yeasted, greened, awakened by such seeing, and the defeats and denigrations of adolescence redeemed. I would go home and tell my mother, who was a little skeptical about my walking with an old man in the park so often, "Mother, I was with my old man again, and when I'm with him, I leave my littleness behind." That deeply moved her. You could not be stuck in littleness and be in the radiant field of Mr. Taylor. The last time I ever saw him was the Thursday before Easter Sunday, 1955. I brought him the shell of a snail. "Ah, escargot!" he exclaimed, and then proceeded to wax ecstatic for the better part of an hour. Snail shells and galaxies, and the convolutions in the brain, the whorl of flowers, and the meanderings of rivers were taken up into a great hymn to the spiraling evolution of spirit and matter. When he had finished, his voice dropped, and he whispered almost in prayer, "Omega, Omega, Omega." Finally, he looked up and said to me quietly, "Au revoir, Jeanne." "Au revoir, Mr. Taylor," I replied. "I'll meet you at the same time next Tuesday." For some reason, Champ, my fox terrier, didn't want to budge, and when I pulled him along, he whimpered, looking back at Mr. Taylor, his tail between his legs. The following Tuesday, I was there waiting, where we always met, at the corner of Park Avenue and 83rd Street. He didn't come. The following Thursday, I waited again. Still, he didn't come. The dog looked up at me sadly. For the next 8 weeks, I continued to wait, but he never came again. It turned out that he had suddenly died that Easter Sunday, but I didn't find that out for years. Some years later, someone handed me a book without a cover, which was titled The Phenomenon of Man. As I read the book, I found it strangely familiar in its concepts. Occasional words and expressions loomed up as echoes from my past. When later in the book I came across the concept of the omega point, I was certain. I asked to see the jacket of the book, looked at the author's picture, and of course recognized him immediately. There was no forgetting or mistaking that face. Mr. Taylor was Teilhard de Chardin, the great priest, scientist, poet, and mystic. And during that lovely and luminous year, I had been meeting him outside the Jesuit rectory of St. Ignatius, where he was living most of the time. I have often wondered if it was my simplicity and innocence that allowed the fullness of Teilhard's being to be revealed. To me, he was never the great priest paleontologist Père Teilhard. He was old Mr. Teilhard. Why did he always come and walk with me every Tuesday and Thursday, even though I'm sure he had better things to do? Was it that in seeing me so completely, he himself could be completely seen at a time when his writings, his work, were prescribed by the church, when he was not permitted to teach or even to talk about his ideas? As I later found out, he was undergoing, at that time, the most excruciating agony that there is, the agony of utter disempowerment and psychological crucifixion. And yet to me, he was always so present, whimsical, engaging, empowering. How could that be? I think it was because Teilhard had what few church officials did, the power and grace of the love that passes all understanding. He could write about love being the evolutionary force, the omega point, that lures the world and ourselves into becoming, because he experienced that love in a piece of rock, in the wag of a dog's tail, in the eyes of a child. He was so in love with everything that he talked in great particularity, even to me as an adolescent, about the desire atoms have for each other, the yearning of molecules, of organisms, of bodies, of planets, of galaxies, all of creation, longing for that radiant bonding, for joining, for the deepening of their condition, for becoming more by virtue of yearning for and finding the other. He knew about the search for the beloved. His model was Christ. For Teilhard de Chardin, Christ was the beloved of the soul. Years later, while addressing some Jesuits, a very old Jesuit came up to me. He was a friend of Teilhard's, and he told me how Teilhard used to talk of his encounters in the park with a girl called Jeanne.
We could hear that several times, couldn't we? That was quite wonderful. Thank you so much. We are now, before we have our reflections and joys and concerns, we have another hymn, which is number 440, also in the red hymnal. Okay, it's time now for our silent meditation. We'll have about 5 minutes where if you can just empty your mind of anything other than the sense of love and completeness that Teilhard exhibited and was experienced, that would be a lovely 5 minutes for you. So I'll let you know when the 5 minutes is over. Amen. And now please join me in reading together the benediction, which is on your order of worship. I think Teilhard, I'm sure, appreciated this when he was alive. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, and if there be any praise, think on these things. And now Eric will share a postlude with us.